Evening, everyone. I'm listening to Jesse Lee Peterson. I have refrained from watching his show, and I am behind on this. Everybody else apparently knows about Jesse Lee Peterson. I watched a bit of him, but not like interviews. Like right now, he's interviewing Barnett, and this is amazing because this is now making there's just so much stuff that I'm realizing I like the disaster that is about to hit our fucking country. As like I mean, because I'm looking at my comments with all these black rednecks, and then I'm listening to this guy Barnett, that this is not a stupid man. Like I could tell by the way he's speaking, even features the pace of his speaking. He's a public performer. This is a smart man. This is a man who, yeah, he's at least average American IQ, the 100, at least. And I'm just shocked that this guy, well, it makes me doubt it. It makes me doubt, really, how fucking smart you have to be a successful comedian. Because the stuff he believes about black America, and there's stuff that I thought slavery was pretty bad, but there was just stuff that I was like, oh, stuff like that was done, but it couldn't have been common. Because you would have, you would simply just be constantly doing like branding and pillaging and raping and destroying your fucking your labor force, who you had to feed and you had to send to the doctor, and people do, like, I was really sitting back like, people do know the equivalent amount of money a black slave cost, like what the equivalent money to today was, because this isn't a joke. Like how much you made in farming, in agricultural work in those times, and how much you had to have paid. Because people don't get, often, if you had black slaves, it was far more likely, and this is really important people get this, the time by which you were no longer allowed to, the ships could not come from Africa to the United States. I think it was like the founding fathers, within I think 10 to 20 years of the founding of the country, had stopped that by law. I don't even think by 1800 you could still ship straight from Africa. So you had to get these people from Cuba. Hence, even the movie, this is shown in the movie Amistad. Amistad, right? That he says to these people, abre tu boca, open your mouth. And the person didn't know what that was. And it's because you're checking their mouth for missing teeth and disease. Because people had diseases all the time. They got infections, bites from various bugs and vipers and spiders and shit. Like you could not buy something that was going to die on you, because this was a lot of fucking money. People don't get this. They think like, oh, they just throw pennies, and that's what black people were worth. And I'm sure like crazy black people probably believe this. And they probably don't. And the reason why this is very important is they don't understand economics at all. And like Barnett is absolutely exposing, he does not understand the most fundamental issue of economics, even though he himself practices this rule. He's talking Jesse Lee Peterson about, oh, well, you were like a slave because you weren't getting a share of the profits from agriculture. And it's like, that's dumb as hell. That's one of the stupidest things. Only really stupid people who've been blinded by Marxism still think this, that you should be sharing in the profits. No, you shouldn't. You can't do anything. The person who runs the company probably does twice as much as you do. before work. Like, this person has their house on the line. This person has loans. Like people who are employees a lot of times don't understand. The boss is the one who owns all the shit you're using to get the job done. You weren't asked to bring any equipment to work. If you were, then you are a contractor. So you are your own boss. And you actually are you should be negotiating for how much for the contract. So, the labor contract. And so this just shows, like, this whole mentality that started occurring since the 60s, that there should be some official fair judgment of money dispensed. And there will be like a money dispensing machine. You have worked for this long. You have tolerated the white man for 6 hours. And then, and it spits money out at you. Like, and it's just, even the way he's broaching his questions to Jesse Lee Peterson show this completely divorced understanding of agrarian life now, all forms of labor now, in any other place other than the United States of America, and also the fact that, like, black Americans are some of the least qualified people in the labor force to do anything. This is why black poverty shot through the roof in the 60s and 70s. Minimum wage. As soon as somebody who couldn't do shit and spoke like country English, the only person who could understand this black dude was the guy from Oklahoma, and he doesn't like him. So if I'm a restaurant owner in Chicago, why, this is worthless to me. I got this one guy from Oklahoma. I don't understand him, but he's at least on time. This guy, I can't understand what he's saying, and he doesn't know how to do anything. And people don't get this, that it's like, no, blacks who are in the North were acquainted with northern whites, and they're totally different than the whites in the South. So much so that into living memory, this has been an issue. In the living memory, the fucking Confederate statue controversies. There's people like, this is a part of our historical heritage, and everybody else is like, oh, y'all is racist, and it's just kind of like, no, really, like, despite any of racism or anything like that, like, no, my ancestors fought on that, underneath that general's command, because they had to. This is all they had. Like, this was our land. Black people owned land. What are you talking about? And that's another thing. There's this idea that there were no free black people. There was no manumission. Nobody ever bought themselves out of slavery. Like, this is only stupid people think this kind of thing. They think that slavery in America was some form of slavery that was, like, even worse than this other kind of slavery. No. White people, as soon as it wasn't worth the money, you were gone. As soon as it wasn't worth it to them. There were people who tried to free their slaves. Thomas Jefferson tried to free his slaves. He couldn't. George Washington tried to free his slaves. He couldn't. Because enough people voted against manumission laws that it was something like, on your deathbed, you had to leave them to somebody else so that they could then, by some fluke in the law, some hole in the law, free their slaves. This was a huge issue to the beginning of the culture. And so it hit me. A lot of this has been going through my head because of this super fucking awesome book that I'm going to be reading a lot of. Because this is fucking awesome. Gangs of New York. This is always the thing, is I had read about the gangs of New York when I was a boy. So I knew that there was a very different story to American history than most people understood. And I just didn't know how different. Let's explore this. Drunkards, laggards, prostitutes, Pirates, from a renegade history of the United States, nurseries of vice and debauchery, on nearly every block in every 18th century American city, so this is the 1700s, there was a public place where one could drink, sing, dance, have sex, argue politics, gamble, play games, or generally carouse with men, women, children, whites, blacks, Indians, the rich, the poor, and the middling. The Founding Fathers were keenly, painfully aware of this. Each morning, during the meetings of the Continental Congress, this is a great way he wrote this, in 1777, John Adams squeezed his round body into breeches, waistcoat, wood sole shoes, and powdered wig, and walked stiffly from his residence on Walnut and 3rd Street to the Pennsylvania State House, now Independence Hall, 4 blocks away on Chestnut between 5th and 6th Streets. Along the way, he passed by at least a dozen of the more than 160 licensed taverns in Philadelphia that serviced the city's population of 24,000. There were also scores of unlicensed taverns, by which means there was at least one tavern for every 100 residents. By contrast, in 2007, there was one alcohol-serving business for every 1,071 residents in Philadelphia. Other early American cities contained even greater tavern densities during the time of the Revolution. In New York, in the 1770s, there were enough taverns to allow every resident of the city to drink in a bar at the same time. In Boston, in the middle of the century, it was estimated that liquor was sold at one of every 8 residential houses. The cities, quote-unquote, write Sharon V. Salinger, the author of Taverns and Drinking in Early America, were packed with taverns. And what would Adams have found if one morning he had clopped into one of the taverns along his way to creating the American Republic? If it was one of the lower class establishments on Walnut Street, the kind of place where most Philadelphians went, before he reached the front door, Adams would have heard white men fiddling Irish reels and black men pounding out driving African rhythms on hand drums, rattles, and wooden blocks. He would have heard a hybrid, flagrantly sexual sound that was the first American urban party music. As he opened the door, Adams would have felt the vibrations of dancing feet on loose wooden floors. Once inside, the statesman's ears would have been assaulted by responding chants, glasses clinking and breaking, laughing and hollering of fuck, shit, bastard, and cunt. He would have inhaled the stink of old beer and the sweet aroma of warm, rum-laden grog. Though Adams was short of stature, he would have felt uncomfortably large inside the narrow, smoky, sweaty room that amplified the noise and made everyone very, very close. But the intimacy of the room would not have been the first thing to strike the Founding Father. If he was a typical lower-class 18th century American urban tavern, he would have seen white men and black men sitting together and drumming their fingers to the music on long wooden tables. He would have seen white women dancing with black men and black women dancing with white men. He would have seen prostitutes openly and shamelessly selling their services, and quite possibly he would have seen a woman behind the bar who not only served the drinks but also owned the place. John Adams would have seen renegade America in all its early glory, and he would have known the enemy. During the War of Independence, America drank an estimated 6.6 gallons of absolute alcohol per year, equivalent to 5.8 shot glasses of 80 proof liquor a day. For each adult 15 or over. This is a staggering statistic, to be sure. Though it likely understates beer consumption, the historian W.J. Rorabaugh has called the period of the Revolution the beginning of America's great alcoholic binge. There was virtually no moral or legal proscription against drinking until after the War of Independence. Historians have found only a handful of prosecutions for drunkenness or unlawful behavior in taverns in colonial county records. In New York, not a single defendant was brought before the court on such charges in all of the 18th century. Salinger concludes that this was likely because magistrates did not place drunkenness high on their list of offenses warranting prosecution. Indeed, drunkenness was often encouraged. On his morning walks to the meetings, Adams would have seen and smelled men and women drinking before or instead of working. When he walked by the shops where craftsmen built furniture, shoes, wagons, tools, and other staples of early American economy, and blacks worked at these places. And it wasn't like, oh, come here, nigga, oh, you're going to work for me now, whoop-a-doo, and no, it was, you had to pay them. You actually had to pay people shillings. You had to pay people. Everyone was drunk and wild. You would get cut if you didn't pay a man. People dueled with swords until Marx's time. Okay. On his morning built furniture, shoes, wagons, tools, and other staples of early American economy, he would have witnessed workers seated in front of tables on which sat their wares alongside their mugs. It was not only accepted, but also expected to mix drinking with work. Laborers of all sorts drank beer throughout the workday and took frequent breaks for liquor and lounging. Construction workers and shipbuilders expected employers to provide them with beer at breaks. According to the historian Peter Thompson, even highly skilled artisans, the managers of early American manufacturing, jealously defended heavy drinking as a right and a privilege. In the early American economy, workers, not bosses, decided when they would show up and when they would go home. Long afternoon periods of eating, drinking, and sleeping were taken for granted. On the 18th century workers' schedule, Sunday was followed by another day of rest known as Saint Monday, which Benjamin Franklin was irritated to see, is as duly kept by our working people as Sunday. The only difference is that instead of employing their time cheaply in church, they are wasting it expensively in the alehouse. God, people could write then. The New Haven Gazette reported that no matter how much an employer wished for sober workers, a laboring man must have his half pint or pint every day, and at night half his wages in rum. Even in New England, where the Puritans' influence remained strong throughout the 18th century, I refer all the time to the Puritans of New England because they are who they're who taught blacks to read. And black Americans just simply do not take this seriously. That is why the Underground Railroad went to the New England area. Notice it didn't go to like the upper peninsula of Wisco, it could have, I just don't, but it was famously went to New England. Into places like Boston. And the reason why is because the Puritans. And these people had extremely... they were very, very disciplined. And so a lot of black American Protestant ministers and their harshness on black Americans, and that you could find all these writers back in the day who were harsh. And you can even find that it becomes somewhat normal when you see, like, say, the writings of W.E.B. Du Bois, or Du Bois, I guess he likes calling it, he would like being called, somebody like that, with kind of a harshness toward their own people. Well, it's because they had been trained by Puritans. So the idea of, like, drinking, it's like, well, yeah, if you drink, if you want to end up in the pokey, it's like there's a lot of people who it's like, okay. Even in New England, where the Puritan influence remained strong through the 18th century, taverns were often located next door to churches so that congregants could have a drink before and after worshiping. I think I am going to thoroughly enjoy the very frank nature of this book, Renegade History of the United States by Thaddeus Russell, I'm going to start looking up some interviews that he must have had on YouTube by now, because I'm betting these stories are amazing. See, this is one of these things you learn from liner notes. Is a lot of people, you know, when black people like saying wild and crazy things about whites and southern whites, and especially just stuff like that, where it's like, no. People didn't have to like each other, or they, you know, people could talk a lot of shit, but it's like, did they sit down next to each other and sing the same songs? And unfortunately, for a lot of these highfalutin young black people of Generation X and on, they have forgotten that, yes, Elvis Presley could sit down with the best black musician and they could sing black songs for hours because he knew them. Because he was a typical, like, mixed race, part native, part Jew, Southerner. People don't get that about a lot of the, you know, people, oh, that guy, Great Balls of Fire, tried to marry his cousin. Yeah. Well, he didn't seem to think that was odd, did he? Because that wasn't that odd back in those days. People don't get that about the black community, too. He didn't leave town. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of traveling going on. So, you know, Tommy Sotomayor has brought a lot of this kind of stuff up. It's there's the black jet set, but any black person who's well cultured, has been around, you've been here, you've been there, you've flown in planes, you've been on trains. You know there's black people who haven't. You know you've met black people who haven't. And when they talk about it, you know, they sound like black people who haven't seen a whole lot. And it could be that they've been reproducing with the same gene pool for quite a bit of time. Nobody wants to take on the ramifications of that. Because, you see, we don't test for consanguinity because we presume it's not an issue. But we don't test for consanguinity, at least from what I know in the Americas. You see, black people do not like talking about consanguinity. If they know what it is, they don't want to talk about it. There's only a handful of people like J-Man and a few other people who understand genetics and the import of consanguinity. And the closer around the equator you get, and about 20 degrees south of the equator, you got a shit ton of consanguinity no matter where you are. And that explains a lot of why the Europeans are one way, Northern Europeans with low consanguinity, and all these other people with high consanguinity. That's a part of it. And a lot of people don't want to deal with that because they don't want to deal with their renegade history. Have a good night.